I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. We walk in the footsteps of this New Yorker on his path to sainthood.
He's always thinking of other people. It's always what can he do for others.
Meanwhile, across the pond, another man is even closer.
He prayed and prayed every day to the intercession of Newman that he'd be healed.
And life lessons from a king.
I work very hard every day to first forgive others, to ask God to forgive me, to love.
Good Wednesday evening, everyone. Well, summer is a great time to get outside, and New York City has just about any type of tour that you can think of, from walking tours to bus tours, visiting neighborhoods and popular landmarks.
That's right, and the Municipal Art Society of New York has a tour that lets you walk in the footsteps of a man who's on the road to sainthood. That man is Pierre Toussaint, and like many others who've eventually been declared saints, his path has been an unlikely one. Our cameras caught up with one of those tours guided by urban historian James Sullivan, who spoke to us about Toussaint's life and his work.
He was a quintessential New Yorker in that he traveled every street in town, walked the city up and down. Although English was his second language and he spoke it very imperfectly, he was French. He was in touch with New York high society, the Hamiltons, the Schuylers, the Livingstons, the Stevens. Well, what's fascinating about Toussaint is that when he comes to New York, he is a slave. But very soon after he arrives, he begins to earn money as a hairdresser. And he begins to buy the freedom of other slaves, but not his own. And he remains a slave in his own relationship with the mistress. He says because his freedom belongs to her. My freedom belongs to my mistress. In other words, he's always thinking of other people. It's always what can he do for others. He's exactly the kind of a personality that the church fathers are talking about in the early 1960s at the Second Vatican Council, where they are writing a document on the apostolate of the laity. And they are saying that the lay person lives their life, their Christian life, in the world. And you see this ability of bringing religion into the workplace as so typifies Toussaint. He's working all day long, seeing people all day long, seeing people on Saturday, seeing customers in the evenings. And yet, while he's working, he is able to radiate this intense spirituality. Back when I was a student, in my student days, I was told about him in a class, and the professor mentioned that he was black, and that's intrigued me because I had associated African Americans with not with the Catholic religion, but with the Protestant religion. And so the fact that he was a Roman Catholic, I began to want to learn more about him, or I became interested in him for that reason. Since Pierre lived in Lower New York, and he lived in what is now called Tribeca, the tour consists of the Tribeca area, also the City Hall area, Lower New York. He had clients, his clientele extended as far as the city extended in his lifetime. So he had people up in this neighborhood. He didn't stop his hairdressing business until the late 1840s, maybe about 1850, and then he really begins to retire. He's not physically capable anymore. Here you find the marker for Pierre Toussaint. This is a marker that was created in 1990. There was no marker when the remains were found in 1990. There were the remains of a marker that said Toussaint with some of the letters rubbed away. But that marker was not in this position. So when they began to dig for the remains and they worked off of that old marker, they did not uncover Pierre's remains. But then the second time, an additional effort did yield 3 skeletons, 3 coffins, piled one on top of the other. And there they found Pierre, his wife Juliet, and his adopted niece Euphemia, who died at 14. He was a Catholic and a very good one, but he was also an amazing human being with many, many gifts. An ability to reach out to all kinds of people. And I think that that is the essence of Toussaint.
Oh, and what a giving man.
How fascinating.
Absolutely. And you know, he went from being a slave to being a rich man and was very generous in giving his entire life.
Gave it all away, gave it to other people for their freedom.
That's right. And we'll have, of course, more about Pierre Toussaint a little bit later on in the show when I talk with Auxiliary Bishop James Sullivan. But coming up next, we'll have the day's headlines.
And this cardinal is flying high.
He prayed and prayed every day to the intercession of Newman that he'd be healed, not for himself, but that he might continue his diaconate classes.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later on in the show, more on the life of Pierre Toussaint as we follow his path to sainthood. But first, the day's headlines and the story of another man even closer to becoming a saint as we hear from Rome Reports.
Cardinal John Henry Newman is set to be beatified very soon, now that the Pope has officially recognized a miracle attributed to his intercession. The approved miracle was the inexplicable cure of a back ailment suffered by Deacon Jack Sullivan.
Jack Sullivan, 69-year-old deacon in the Archdiocese of Boston in Massachusetts, had a very serious spinal condition, and so much so that he was totally bent over double, so he was looking at the ground the whole time, and he was in tremendous pain, and he prayed and prayed every day to the intercession of Newman that he'd be healed, not for himself, but that he might continue his diaconate classes and be ordained a deacon, which he wanted to do.
Beatification is the step that precedes canonization. It means the candidate for sainthood can be venerated in his diocese. Cardinal John Henry Newman was an Anglican presbyter that converted to Catholicism in 1845. He was one of the most important figures of the Oxford movement that advocated for the Church of England's return to its Catholic roots. One of his biggest admirers is Benedict XVI, who during his years in the seminary studied Newman's life and writings. The only thing that's left is the date for beatification. The ceremony could be celebrated next year in Rome or London, the cardinal's place of birth.
Now, in this country, a society named after Cardinal Newman led some of the protests over Notre Dame's honoring of President Obama last spring. Now, speaking of the president, just days before he is to meet with Pope Benedict for the very first time, Obama says he's looking forward to reading the Pope's latest encyclical. He tells Fox News the Catholic Church's tradition of social justice has had a profound influence on him. The president says the late Archbishop of Chicago, Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, was steeped in that tradition and was someone that he admired.
From Washington, the U.S. Bishops' Conference is speaking out against new federal guidelines on embryonic stem cell research. Cardinal Justin Regali says the new policies are even broader than what the National Institutes of Health drafted back in April, a proposal that he also objected to. Among the policies the Cardinal opposes, parents won't be informed about all other alternatives to embryo research. In Ohio, Wendy's has been an institution for almost 40 years, but now another institution whose roots go further back is moving in. The Catholic Foundation of the Diocese of Columbus has purchased the original Wendy's restaurant. The restaurant has been closed since 2007.
That picture is making me hungry.
I guess they're not going to be serving up hamburgers anymore, but that's all right. There's much more ahead on Currents, and for more on Pierre Toussaint, a Haitian American on the road to sainthood, we'll hear from the first Haitian American bishop. We have that story just ahead.
Well, earlier on in the show, we got a walking tour of some places that figured in the life of Pierre Toussaint. And now here joining us to talk a little bit more about Pierre Toussaint's life and his relevance today, Bishop Sansaricq. Thank you so much for joining us, Bishop.
It's my privilege. And may the Lord bless all those who are listening to us.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We really do appreciate it. Now, one question that I have just off the top of my head, you know, some people may be watching and say, who in the world is Pierre Toussaint? So that's my first question. Who is Pierre Toussaint?
Pierre Toussaint was born a slave in Haiti. He belonged to the estate of Mr. Bérard, Jean-Jacques Bérard, who was a French slave owner and colonialist in Haiti. And he was born on June 27, 1774. That's interesting because June 27 is also the feast of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, who is the patroness of Haiti. So Pierre Toussaint was born on June the 27th. At the age of 23, his master decided to move to New York because the slaves in Haiti had started the revolution toward the release of all slaves. So he came to New York and learned the trade of a barber, not so much for men, but barber for women, because in those days, ladies had very sophisticated hair dressing, is that what you call that? So he became a very good hairdresser. And his master went back to Haiti and then got sick and died. So Pierre Toussaint, who was still a slave in the United States, began to work as a barber and was extremely appreciated because of his manners, because of his wisdom. So the ladies, I mean rich ladies and white ladies in New York, fell in love with him, sought his advice, and enjoyed his conversation. So he became extremely popular among all those Mrs. Schuyler's, the Barclays, all the rich ladies of the days. And he became a rich man in some ways. But he used his money to support the widow and also to purchase a freedom for his sister and to purchase the freedom of a number of black persons. He himself became a free man at the age of 33. And then he continued to really make a lot of good things with his fortune, with his money, yes.
So he really, I mean, he kind of lived two different lives almost. I mean, one as a slave in bondage, one as a free man, and really kind of found a fortune as a free man. Did that change him at all?
No, at all, because he used his money to, for instance, to participate in the building of the Fundling Hospital, which was a hospital for orphans, mostly white orphans. He used his money to invest into the building of the Church of St. Peter, which is still in existence in Manhattan on Barclay, on the corner of Barclay and Church. He also supported Mother Lange, who was another Haitian lady, a black lady who came to the United States in Baltimore and who realized that black children had no school. And she fought to open a school for black children, and she founded a religious community of sisters for black women. And that was very difficult for her because many Catholics didn't think that black women could become sisters, okay? So, but she had a number of orphans, and she founded the school, the Academy of St. Francis, which is still in existence in Baltimore, and Pierre Toussaint supported them. But he became remarkable mostly for the way, he was a pleasant man. He played the violin, he sang, he animated parties, and he became very, very much loved. But at the same time, he went to church every morning, received Holy Communion, and kind of radiated Christianity and his strong Catholic faith.
Right, did a lot of great things. Well, now he is on the path to sainthood, correctly? I mean, he is venerable now, correct?
He is. That means that all of his documents relating to him have been studied and classified and sent to Rome to the Congregation for the Cause of Saints. And they have already examined his papers, and they have declared that he's obviously a great Christian. Okay. But in order to become a blessed, he's not yet a blessed, he needs miracles.
Yes.
But miracles.
Gotcha.
And there is at least one important miracle that is attributed to his intercession. In 1977, a French priest from Haiti reported that one of his main helpers was suffering from cancer, and the doctors, having given him all possible treatments, had given up any hope and had told him to wait for his death.
Yeah.
And the priest and himself, they prayed to Pierre Toussaint. And then when he went back to the doctor, they were amazed they couldn't find any trace of cancer.
Wow.
This miracle, of course, has been presented also to Rome. However, the church is very demanding. You know, probably they would like to study the reports of the doctors and everything. Right. And I'm not sure that all these reports have been properly documented.
Gotcha.
But Pierre Toussaint is not sufficiently known so that many people don't really have recourse to his intercession. So this is why miracles might be slow to come.
Gotcha, and more are required. Well, that's about all the time that we have, but Bishop Sansaricq, thank you so much for joining us with a little bit more of your insight on Pierre Toussaint's life. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go back to Francesca.
Thanks so much, Matt. Well, we have more about Pierre Toussaint on our blog. You can head over to netny.net/currents and just click on Writing the Wave. Now, Bishop Guy talked about Toussaint's generosity. Still just ahead on Currents, we'll meet another African American speaking and acting on behalf of others. Eyewitness to history.
My daddy's voice, I can hear it now. And he's like, you can't hate the people that did this.
Welcome back to Currents. Now, on this night where we met Pierre Toussaint, a man who went from being a slave to a free man to being venerated in the Catholic Church, we wanted to revisit another African American who's continuing her family's civil rights legacy.
In Alveda King's case, it's speaking out for the unborn. She's the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., and tonight we hear about where it all began for her.
I remember my grandfather, Martin Luther King Sr., who I always said was my very best friend, and he would say, I've got faith, I've got hope, and I've got love. And he says, I'll never stoop so low as to let another man cause me to hate him. And so I work very hard every day to first forgive others, to ask God to forgive me, to love. Very often I read the Bible, I worship, I play worship music, and I pray. And I pray every day. But the most important thing that I can do is to love somebody every day and to not do evil to others. And I work very hard to live that way as well. Birmingham is being called Bombingham because they were bombing houses and churches and motels. I went to school with one of the little girls. You couldn't really understand. As I can remember being 12 years old as a child, how could somebody do this to little girls who never did anything to them? It was one of my very first lessons in forgiveness because my parents, my daddy, said you cannot hate the people who did this. And I remember that just as clearly. My daddy's voice, I can hear it now. And he's like, you can't hate the people that did this. And we're going to go out and we're going to march. And he said, we'll take the children because surely they won't harm any more of our children. When I was a very little girl, I went to Ebenezer Baptist Church. And around the corner, there was a lovely Catholic church. And a little friend of mine who was also going to Catholic school at the time, our church service was long enough that we could check in at the Baptist church, sit up in the balcony, slip out and go to Mass, and finish Mass and come back to church. And so I've attended Mass many, many times over the years. I believe that the Catholic Church has demonstrated and proven that they are the leaders in the life movement. And I have a tremendous respect for that. On the day that I'm 100, I would like to think back and believe that I have given everything I could to love the Lord Jesus Christ and to love the people that He creates. And in that love, to promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Alveda King, tonight's eyewitness. And, it kind of reminds me of something that Bishop Sansaricq said off camera after we were talking. And he mentioned before he headed out the door that really without Pierre Toussaint, there might not have been Martin Luther King or a Barack Obama. That he kind of was one of those that paved the way for the civil rights movement.
What a trailblazer! And who knew that he was, again, still a slave when he was buying other people's freedoms. And one of the little side notes that we also wanted to mention is that that tour that was given, that was a public tour, I guess on July 5th, that's actually when he was liberated from his slavery. But that public tour isn't available all the time, but I guess you can get it privately if you'd like to see it, because I guess it's down in the Tribeca area where he was living at the time. Right.
So just not many opportunities for the public to see it, but it is definitely a very interesting thing. So
absolutely,
go see it if you can.
And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was that he was buried in that initial, plot or that area, but then apparently now he's over at St. Patrick's Cathedral in the crypt over there, which is really amazing. Yes,
it is. That when they were looking for that grave, as you saw in the piece, they actually exhumed the bodies and moved them.
Right. Well, good luck on the path to sainthood on that.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all for this particular edition of Currents on this Wednesday night. On tomorrow's show, for the first time, President Obama meets with the Pope, and we'll have some analysis.
And remember, you can always watch us online tonight, tomorrow, anytime. You just head on over to our website, netny.net/currents. There, you can watch segments from each episode and read more about the people in front of the camera and behind the scenes here. You can also follow us on Twitter. The address there is twitter.com/currentsny.
We are so progressive.
We're all over the place. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Have a great night.